Cool. Thanks all of you for coming out. So I'm Callum and I'm going to be talking to you guys about cooperative behaviours and the model that we've been using. I'm talking about it because I've built something. I've worked on a really interesting problem recently, working with cooperative behaviours in a game that I've built, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys. So just before I start, we're just wondering, would you guys, oh, can you hear me? Cool, great. Would you guys mind please just raising your hand if you're currently working on a cooperative game? A few of us. Yeah, nice, cool. All right. So, just a quick note about me before I get into it. So, I've been in the industry for 3 years. I'm a game designer. So, I started out by modding Factorio. So that's already a cooperative game. So the next thing I did was I've been working at My Toner on another cooperative game, Publix. So that was a social game specifically. And then over the last year, the project I've been working on is Dream Team Supreme at Big Adventure. So Big Adventure is a studio of 4 of us, and Dream Team Supreme is the project I'm going to be talking about today. Cool. So, to start with, cooperative games. This is a huge field. That's sort of the motivation behind the problem. The problem that I'm going to be talking about is the fact that cooperation is a very, very big thing that contains a lot of smaller behaviours. It's hard for us to pick out these behaviours from each other. It's hard to compare cooperation in one game to another, like MMOs are cooperative, and party games are a certain type of cooperative, like you're cooperating to have fun. In MMOs, you're cooperating by leading other people. Like these are all very, very different types of cooperation, and it makes things really hard to compare and actually make decisions around, because it's very hard to pinpoint what exactly you're talking about. So what I'm going to be doing is presenting a model. This is a model that I've worked on. It's going to be 13 parts. So there's 13 different cooperative behaviours that we found. And for each of these, I'm going to present an example, so a game that really demonstrates the cooperative behaviour, and I'm going to talk through what exactly you see with that behaviour. So just a limitation before we go into it. This is not a rigorous approach by any means. In fact, it's more of a loose amalgamation of different behavioural markers that were found in a series of different psychological studies that I read. So I think I went over about 3 or 4, found different ways that psychologists had laid out cooperative behaviours and then sort of mixed them together into one model. So and the other limitation is that there's a slight bit of overlap between some of these behaviours. So that will become apparent as I begin talking about them. Cool. So the first cooperative behaviour, and probably the one that everyone's the most familiar with, the most sort of splashy one, is explicit coordination. So this is about communicating out loud to align your plans, your goals, your knowledge. So the example game that I've got for this is keep talking and no one explodes. So the idea of this game is that one player is defusing a bomb, and all they can see is the bomb, and one player is using a manual to guide the other player. So the diffuser has to very accurately communicate what they see and what they're doing, and the manual reader has to provide extremely clear instructions to avoid any mistakes. So what players have to do is they have to quickly, efficiently, and perfectly communicate out loud. Now, the really interesting thing about explicit coordination is that it's stressful. Like, players, to an extent it can add like a lot of excitement, but at the same time it is stressful to do for a large amount of time, and it's generally like not something that you'd want to see in a party game, or well, not in a party game, in like a puzzle game or a cooperative like game that's going on for like a really long time. Like, you're not a chill game, you're not going to see much explicit coordination around. So you can compare it with implicit coordination. So this is basically players working through things without actually having to talk about them. So the examples I've given for implicit coordination are like Overcooked and Derailed, which are sort of 4-player games where you're given tasks to do, and then the speed and the complexity of the tasks sort of ramps up until cracks appear and then everything explodes pretty horrifically. So the idea is that there's a focus on hilarious and memorable stories coming up. So there is way too much for everyone to do for them to actually to be able to like talk about what they're doing. Like if you're playing Overcooked with 4 of you, you've got dishes to do, you've got food to make, and there's just too many tasks. You can't actually talk them all through. And what it leads to is players finding their own responsibility, finding their own lane and staying in it, and working together towards a common goal, but not necessarily talking about it. This is more comfortable than explicit coordination. It's less stressful. There's less information going on at all the time. You don't have to be, you don't have to focus on whether you're being accurate the whole time and everything. This is a really comfortable behaviour. Yeah, so you end up anticipating each other's needs without discussing every single action that you take. So another cooperative behaviour. The next 3 are going to be about planning. So the first part of planning is situational assessment, which is when players are cooperatively gathering information around their environment so that they can solve puzzles. So the really good example for this one is I don't even know what to say, it's a cult hit Among Us. I think we're all familiar with it. So the idea is that players have to assess various cues to determine which one of the players is an imposter. So you have to collect information from actions, conversations, and the state of the game. So a huge amount of this game revolves around doing exactly that, by using the environment, by looking at other players and their actions, and using that to solve the central mystery of the game, who's the imposter. So you're constantly on the lookout for any small signs that one of your other players is suspicious or sus. Cool. The next part of cooperative planning is mission analysis. So this is once you have the information, what you're doing now is you're playing around with it, you're being creative, and you're pushing the boundaries of what you think you can actually do with that information. So it's about it being exploratory as opposed to any sort of detailed or planned out strategy. So in Portal 2 is a really good example of this one, because I'm referring to the cooperative mode of Portal 2, where you've got 2 robots and you're trying to solve physics-based puzzles with very simple elements together. So the really important part of this is that the puzzles have very simple elements. There's not much information or anything to gather. The puzzles are very comprehensible, but you usually have to sort of break your own limits on what you think you can do with the puzzle elements by being creative and by playing with it until you have a solution. Cool. So the next part is also planning, strategy formulation. So generating a sequence of actions, a really good one. So while there's some room for experimentation, this is more about like optimizing and refining your existing solutions. So the game I like to give as a demonstration for this is Factorio, which is a refining and optimizing game. So generally, it's about players spend the entire time creating big, long, structured plans and preparing for how they're going to reuse them in the future. So again, there's a bit of room for experimentation in Factorio, but that's not what the game is really about. Most of it is about refining your existing solution and just optimizing outputs and getting the numbers bigger and bigger and bigger. The factory must grow. So another interesting thing about strategy formulation is that a lot of the decisions that you're making with this one are like very individual. Like individuals are making the decision. They're not necessarily talking about them out loud when it comes to like refining and optimizing. But the point is, you're doing this towards a cooperative goal, and that's enough for it to be considered a cooperative behaviour. Cool. Our next cooperative behaviour is backup behaviours. So this is about teammates providing those resources and task-related efforts to other teammates when there's imbalances in the gameplay. So the example I like to talk about with this one is healer classes. So this is Mercy, the healer from Overwatch. So the idea is that healers in any like MMO or shooter game, they provide health as a resource to any teammates that are lacking them. So Another good example of game design promoting backup behaviours is Deep Rock Galactic, where this is a 4-player cooperative game where players have different roles that have different strengths and weaknesses. And because these roles are very, very asymmetrical, it means that imbalances come up and that players have to fill those imbalances. So for example, the scout is amazing at moving in 3 dimensions and grabbing things out of hard to reach areas, whereas the gunner is very immobile but can shoot really good. So when there's lots of bugs coming, the scout will rely on the gunner, and when there's objects to go reach, then the gunners will rely on the scouts. Cool. So a very similar behaviour that you can see is mutual performance monitoring. So this is a little bit different. This is about teammates adjusting their behaviours or strategy based on the awareness of each other's performance, but without actually directly applying and giving those resources or assistance. So it's different to backup behaviours because backup behaviours is where the teammates are actively stepping in to help with the resources. So for example, in Overwatch, you would say that the mutual performance monitoring is that anyone can see that someone's missing health. Anyone can stop and go, hold on, healer, you need to go and heal this specific person. Anyone can have that awareness over the team's performance in terms of health, but only one player is able to actually carry out that backup behaviour in terms of giving the health, and that would be the healer specifically. So they're very similar but slightly different. Cool. Next behaviour, interpersonal relationships. So this is about just hanging out. This is when players are doing things like joking around, pranking, being a bit silly, and hopefully you see this in any cooperative game. So the game I've chosen that exemplifies this for me is Lethal Company, where the informal and slow-paced and very silly setting can lead to it really lends itself well to jokes and pranks in the first half of the game where there's no tension. And one effect of this is that it gives a huge juxtaposition to the second half of the game when the shenanigans really start and everything suddenly gets horrifying. So it's human moments that are providing contrast and suspense when the ending can become very inhuman. The next cooperative behaviour, and this is a weird one, is failure. So the experience that players go through when they're failing due to a lack of team skills or task skills. So the examples I give for this one are social deduction games. So the idea about this is they're about everyone's working cooperatively to accomplish some tasks, but the game adds a few antagonists to the team who try to disrupt the team's dynamic and prevent those tasks from actually being carried out. When a team has a lot of good antagonists in it, antagonists who know what they're doing, then they're able to derail the social dynamic and prevent the players from actually getting anything accomplished. So if you've ever played a social deduction game where the antagonists knew what they're doing, then you know what it's feel like to be a part of a team that can't do anything but fail. Cool. So last few. Adaptability is another quite stressful cooperative behaviour. The example I'm giving for this one is the game Left 4 Dead, which is about, it's a cooperative game where you're escaping zombies. So players often have to adapt when things go wrong. So whenever a teammate might be incapacitated, or whenever a special infected will derail your progress, then players have to, on the spot, come up with new strategies, new routes, or they might have to improvise defensive positions. Cool. Next one is team leadership. So for the examples I've given for this are two quite large MMOs. So the leadership in each of these is a bit different though. So this is the behaviour here is about coordinating large amounts of players. So in World of Warcraft, this is about specific group content where leaders have to manage resources like cooldowns, healing rotations, or answering specific boss mechanics. So it's about real-time tactical decisions, and more senior players have to take the lead in that and actually sort of direct other players about how to answer that. Whereas in Eve, this is the scale goes up again. This can be about fleet commanders who take control of the actions of hundreds or even thousands of other players. This is more long-term strategic planning or resource management, diplomacy, and large-scale warfare. So it's about dealing with economic systems and territorial control and coordinating large amounts of players, again, as I've mentioned. Cool. Task adhesion. This is another cooperative behaviour this is another really fun one. So this is about the teammates that are expressing their commitment and enthusiasm and saying, hey, we're having a good time, we're going to achieve this, we're going to do it. So again, this is another one that should come through in any team game with a really healthy dynamic. So the example I've given for this one is Dark Souls. It's notoriously difficult, and it's normally single player, but players can optionally choose to summon other characters into their game to help them out with particularly hard bosses. So the communication options that you have in Dark Souls are very restricted. You can only really use in-game gestures, whether it's like clapping or bowing or the very famous Praise the Sun emote. So what has happened is that over time, Dark Souls players have developed their own culture and their own language for expressing themselves through these. And that's all task adhesion. And finally, our last behaviour is system monitoring. So the example I've given for this is probably a bit less known than the others. This is Don't Starve Together, which is a game all about trying not to die. So the point is that in this game, the situation is changing the whole time, whether it's the weather, whether it's the enemies that are on the prowl, whether it's day or night. And what players have to do is it's quite a substantive bit of work for each player to be aware of what is changing and what does the team need. So whether it's like wood to make fires, whether it's food for everyone to eat, or whether it's materials to craft the right structure. It is a fair bit of work to actually determine what is happening, what are the threats that are on the horizon, and what are we going to do about them. Cool. All right, so what I've told you is the 13-part model that we've developed for sort of recording the behaviours that we see with cooperation. So now I'm going to show you guys how we at Big Adventure use this to make a game design decision. And, no, why is there nothing there? Okay, whatever. Can I play this? Oh, there was a video here. Could I have that played, please? Guess not. That's all right. Okay. Oh, you're still trying it. Yeah, okay. I'll keep going. So anyway, what I'm going to talk about now is Dream Team Supreme. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide, please. Cool, thank you. Cool, so Dream Team Supreme this is the game that I've been working on for the last year. It's a two-player co-op, online co-op game, and it's a roguelike deck builder. So that means it's a card game. What players do is they slot cartridges into slots, and they build a sequence of events by doing so that they can beat up Saturday morning cartoon villains. Cool. So, actually no, I need to go back one step because I need to talk about our target audience. Our target audience for this product is an intersection of about three groups. In particular, that's players who like roguelike deck builders. They tend to be a very passionate bunch. They love card games of all sorts, and if you say that any game's a roguelike deck builder, they just jump onto it. The next group is players who like co-op games. Generally, they're quite picky. And the third group is players who are into giant robots. Cool. So what we ended up doing is, I believe we carried the survey out in April. We managed to find intersections on Reddit where we believe that there were players who were in at least two of those groups. So we managed to get 110 responses, so not too serious, but it gave us a bit of an indication. What we tried to do is we were asking people about which of these sort of cooperative behaviours did they feel like they were passionate about carrying out, and which ones were they, which ones did they not like so much? So not enjoyable in blue there. So generally, as a bit of a vibe check, we got a bit of an indication here that players love the feeling of joking around and having casual conversations. Players love sort of like adapting, making things up on the spot. And players were far less into doing something like staying on top of teammates' performances or staying on top of resources and systems. So what we'd found was that, players want to live in the moment with other players and just experience that. Cool. So with that in mind, I'm going to just talk quickly about our prototyping. So in April, this is what our products looked like. So this is a Figma screen grab. So the way it worked is the purple cards here are the enemy. And what would happen is you'd get a sequence like this every turn. And the purple slots, those were what the monster was going to do that turn. And so you have the green slots there and the blue slots there. Those are the player slots. What you get to do is the player gets to take some of their cards and they get to slot it in. They get to take some of the green cards and slot those over here. And we had two different types of cards. We had cards with the orange thing on top, and those could be slotted in from under here. And we had cards that didn't have the orange thing on top, and you could slot those on top there. So it was like players, we had two decks, and you had two types of cards in every deck. And we were playing around with it. We're gradually improving it, and we were just wanting to experiment with different ideas and see how could we take the next step with this? How could we add some complexity? How could we add a bit of a sort of more of a puzzle feel to it? We had some rough ideas around what we wanted. We had our game pillars. We had this sort of philosophy of what was going to feel right to us. But what we wanted to also include like what's going to take this in the right direction of like co-op. What's going to feel right to our players. Cool. So then we had a new idea. The new idea, we called this the two halves approach. So instead of cartridges that you could only put above the slot or you could only put below the slot, we said, what if every cartridge could go above or below the slot? It would just do a different thing if you put it below and a different thing if you put it above. So this was one of five ideas that we'd prototyped in the week. So we just, it does something different. It's every single cartridge has like a different above and below action. So for example, this one, Acid 2, if I put this on top, then you get the +5 corrosive. And if you put it below, you'd get the staction. So we liked it, the way it played ourselves, but the next thing we wanted to do was we wanted to take the model and say, is this going to be a good thing for cooperation or a bad thing for cooperation? So just a warning, there's going to be a lot of text, please don't try to read it. A lot of text, ignore it. So what we had was the different cooperative behaviours. We had the dynamics of how those of how we felt that with our existing product, those cooperative behaviours, how that interfaced. And all that's important here are the two colours, red and green. So what we did is we said for each of the cooperative behaviours, did this new idea, did it make it, did it make it a less favourable dynamic? So did it have more of the types of cooperation we weren't looking for, or less of the type of cooperation that we were looking for? Those are the areas that are in red. Or was it like a favourable change? Did it give us more of the behaviours that we were looking for, or less of the behaviours that we weren't looking for? So for all of those areas, that's in green there. So overall, that let us make a decision. By being able to break it up into those rough positives and negatives, it gave us a ground to talk about where we could say this is probably a good thing for cooperation because the amount of distinct positives and the magnitude of them was important as well. But we decided that it was worth keeping. Our own impressions as well were that it was quite a unique idea. It was introducing trade-offs for every cartridge, and it was giving a bit of a geometry puzzle. We liked that as well. So the next important part was user testing it, and as we'd suspected, what we came up with was what the user testing was showing was that the players were really into it. And the other interesting thing that happened is that because we had those dynamics that we slightly worsened by introducing the new idea, this gave us a starting point for like other areas of the prototype that we needed to nail down. So that led us to our next sort of few weeks of prototyping as well. So overall, we felt that by using the model in this way, it gave us great tools to talk about for each of those cooperative behaviours. How do our prototypes like influence how those behaviours are expressed? And it gave us, that. Cool. So in summary, what I've talked about is I've showed you guys the 13 cooperative behaviours that we've used in our model of cooperation, and I've showed you how that we use that at Big Adventure to make a game design decision, specifically whether we kept the new prototype that we came up with. So in general, I hope I've demonstrated that there are a large different array of behaviours that we can consider cooperative, and that we can make decisions about, at an individual behaviour level, about whether that's going to make our game better or worse. And I hope that helps you guys with thinking about your own games. Thank you. So does anyone have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation, Callum. It's really good. Do you have this framework available for other people to use, other than taking pictures of all these slides?
We haven't done so, but I assume the slides are available. I kind of had assumed the slides were available.
You'd like to think so, yeah. But just in case they're not, yeah. The second question, and more the question about the framework you've got. When you were doing the amalgamation of all the different psychological frameworks you were looking at in cooperation, I know you've presented it as a list and kind of broken it down, but did you see any dimensions through which you could analyze these things? Because you didn't, like for instance, you had the implicit and explicit things, and I was wondering if you had like a team to system dimension, an implicit to explicit coordination dimension, and these kind of things that you use when you're talking about the cooperation.
So in this context, what exactly do you mean by a dimension? Like, are you saying like, how do we know that like they're not overlapping or anything, or?
Not so much the overlapping. If you were to graph it visually, you could have a spectrum that goes from implicit to explicit team coordination. Right. And you could have system down to team, like what they're analyzing, those kind of things. So if you can graph it visually, how many dimensions would you need to kind of graph it? And if you have done that, and if you found it useful, or if not, do you think it would be? So the way I saw that being represented in the original psychology papers for that were they were recording like on a sort of minute by minute basis. Were players like in a binary way? So like were players displaying that behaviour or not? So that meant like that
that accepted behaviours, players are demonstrating multiple of those at once, for example. So it could be like, I'm externally coordinating, I'm showing a backup behaviour, and I'm like doing just any other number of those at the same time. Yeah, I don't think I've seen any other dimensions for that. I can't imagine how you do like a magnitude or something for like, this is a very intense example of this or that. So yeah, that's the only way I've seen that.
That would be a fun exercise to see if it's revealing as part of
Yeah.
Which is why I may want to see your framework later. Yeah.
Fair enough. Any further questions?
Thanks for sharing the Figma prototype. I'm interested if you guys use Figma prototypes to play the game together, and if so, if you can tell us a bit about that and what you learned from it.
Oh, I'm super happy to. That was super fun. So between April to May, I think we used 30-something different Figma prototypes, and yeah, that was us playing it. It was getting user testers into Figma and playing it with them. So I was the calculator. I just learned, I had to make sure I knew all the game rules and I could do all the maths and everything. It hurt my brain. But it was great because, especially working in a studio with 4 people, you could change things so quickly. Figma is a great tool for doing paper prototyping on that level. Yeah, I think at our fastest, within one sprint of 5 days, we managed to go through 6 prototypes on Figma, like completely different game builds, and have all 4 of us play them as well. So it's been pretty magical, actually. Yeah, no, it's did that answer your question? Cool. Any further question? Oh, yeah.
Just building on that, what would you say was the point where you thought these systems have been developed enough, these endowments and stuff, I'm going to stop doing playtests and move this prototype into, building the game itself?
That's a good question. So I would say an external deadline. Like, I think we'd said we're going to do the prototype phasing for this long, sort of time boxing it, and say after then, I'm sure we'll have more ideas and everything, but going into a digital demo and increasing the scope of people that we're going to play it and everything, that will give us sort of higher quality feedback on that as well. So I would say by doing it up front and like forcing yourself to say, if you've got 2 months to prototype, what do you really want to do in those 2 months? So I liked doing it that way because it meant that we sort of skipped all of the sort of prototypes that we weren't really believing in. We just didn't have time. So I'm sure we'll do it in the future, but it will be like, we're missing these elements. It will be very targeted. It will be like, we're missing these sort of elements in the game. We need to make this or this more fun. What are our ideas? So I think spiking, I think they call that. That will be the approach from now, where it's like, there's 4 of us. We've got a week. Solve this problem. Go make a bunch of prototypes.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions?
It's not a question, it's just an anecdote of
Go ahead.
At a previous job, thinking about the implicit cooperation of Overcooked. I think we had a 20-minute game and then we had a 40-minute gathered round the whiteboard session afterwards. I'm not even joking.
Yeah, it is one of those games. Yeah.
With your big list of the 13 things, did you ever go through the process of like going, actually we just don't care about this one for our cooperative game, this thing doesn't matter to us, we're only targeting these 3?
That's a good question.
Or are you like, we need to get everything in there?
I think with every single cooperative behaviour, you looked at the game in a different way. So each of them had value from that perspective. Like I would say, I don't think there were any that our users were indifferent to, really. Like, it would be more like, some of our users would be indifferent to this one, but then others would, especially since we just had like quite diverse audiences. And one thing I didn't mention was that we'd section things out by age and by like level of experience with roguelike deck builders. Those all seem to make a very big noticeable difference to the data, even with such a small sample size of only 110 or so. So there weren't any cooperative behaviours on that list that players were like universally, nah, we don't really care about that. So yeah, and we found that each of them did give a completely very different perspective. So yeah, all of them were good discussion points, I think.
You talked about getting players to kind of joke around was one of your kind of goals. Did you find when you changed certain game dynamics, it changed how much people joked around and played?
Yeah, I had something about that. What did I even write? Task cohesion, I think. Oh, yeah. So I think we noticed both times, referring to the stacking dynamics specifically in that prototype, whether you're putting it above or below, we noticed that with it or without it, players were sort of excited about doing it the same amount. Like people were commenting on it, people were being like, oh, this is a bit different, this is a bit, So I would say we have data about it not making a difference. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
No worries. Any more questions? Cool, that might be it, unless there was... Nope, okay, I think that's me for today then. Thank you all very much for coming.